Welcome to the Blue Security Podcast, a weekly podcast for information security defenders, where we bring you discussions on best practices, tools, and implementation for enterprise security. Now, here are your hosts for today's show, Andy Jha and Adam Brewer.
Welcome to this week's episode of the Blue Security Podcast. I'm Andy, your host.
I'm Adam, your co-host.
Okay, so you might have remembered when I kind of hyped up Nicole Perros To Catch a Thief, which is a podcast series that you should definitely listen to if you're in cybersecurity. She came out, Nicole Perros was a former New York Times cybersecurity reporter. She wrote the book, This Is How They Tell Me the World Ends, which is about the whole malware exploit underground market for cyber criminals. But she came out with this podcast series called To Catch a Thief, which was all about China and how they've been, exploiting companies, hacking into companies, and how they're using that leverage as national security and all of that. So that first season, it's a limited, production, worth the listen. But she recently came out with a second season, and I started listening to it, and it's all about the North Korea IT worker scam. Now, this is something that I've been reading about for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
I've had links in here to talk about it, but I never really had a chance. We never really had a chance to kind of put it in a story. So that's what we're going to talk about today. It's kind of like the whole thing about the North Korean IT worker scam, kind of like how long it's been going on, what are some of the tactics that they're doing, how you can recognize this. And then definitely if you want a more in-depth, fully researched with interviews and everything, this season 2 of To Catch a Thief by Nicole Perros is phenomenal. Hasn't finished yet. She's releasing one episode per week or something like that for the next couple of weeks. I think I listened to the first 3 episodes and it's phenomenal. So anyways, without further ado, let's get into it. So we're going to start off with a story that actually happened to a cybersecurity company called KnowBe4. Now, if you're in the cybersecurity world, you've probably heard of them. They're really well known for their spam / phishing type of protection. So in July of 2024, KnowBe4 posted a job for a principal software engineer, and they ran their normal process, 4 separate video interviews, a background check, a reference check. They even confirmed that the person on the video calls matched the photo on the resume, and everything came back clean. They hired the guy, and then they shipped him a company laptop. The moment the laptop was connected to the network, it started loading malware. And the security team actually caught it within minutes through their endpoint detection software. They called the new hire to ask, what's going on? And he kind of gave a vague answer that he was troubleshooting his router or whatever. And then he went quiet. Within 25 minutes of the first alert, they cut off his access completely. So then when they ran the photo of his resume through a stock photo run in an AI tool, it turns out that it was something that was made to look like a real headshot. The identity he used actually belonged to an actual American citizen, and then the whole thing was traced back to North Korea. So if a company that's built around kind of catching this kind of fraud can get fooled all the way through hiring, it can really happen to any company, any one of us out here. And that's kind of what we're kind of digging into, how long it's been going on, who's behind it, how they pull it off, how much money is actually involved, and what you can actually do about it. So as I said before, this is not a new problem. It feels new because there's a lot of headlines in it lately, but it actually dates back almost over a decade. Kim Jong-un took power in 2011, and he made information technology a national priority for North Korea. So their intelligence services, including the Reconnaissance General Bureau, started recruiting top graduates out of schools like Kimchek University of Technology. And these recruits get trained in hacking, foreign languages, technical skills. In exchange, they are promised better pay and something that's really incredibly rare for a North Korean citizen, actual internet access. And for many years, it ran as a smaller operation. And then COVID hit, and remote work became the norm everywhere. And this was kind of the moment where that scheme went from a side hustle to an industrial operation, because suddenly no company thought twice about hiring someone they'd never met in person. The US government first put out public warnings about this back in May of 2022. There was a joint advisory from the FBI, the Treasury Department, and the State Department. And then since then, we've gotten updates in July of 2023, October of 2023, May of 2024, January 2025, each one describing new tactics as the threat has evolved. If you look at the actual court cases, some of them stretch all the way back to like the first federal indictment covered activity from April of 2018 all the way through August of 2024. And that case alone involved at least 64 US companies. And just from 10 of those companies, prosecutors documented over $866,000 in revenue laundered through a Chinese bank account. Another case covered a 6-year conspiracy that generated at least $88 million run through two DPRK controlled front companies based in China and Russia. And then another case covered activity going back to April of 2017. So this has been building quietly for a lot of years. And what really changed was COVID, and that changed in scale. So CrowdStrike, which is, yeah, if you're in cybersecurity, you've heard of CrowdStrike before. They say they're now investigating roughly one incident per day tied to this type of activity. Their most recent threat hunting report found a 220% increase year over year in the number of companies infiltrated, over 320 companies in a single 12-month period. Their newest report says this single group now accounts for 47% of all state-sponsored hands-on keyboard intrusions against the tech sector. So not really just a fringe problem anymore. It is now a mainstream threat that every single hiring manager needs to know about.
I'm having customers bring this to my attention now and asking questions around, hey, what can we do about this? Is there are there tools and technologies that can help prevent this? And I think we'll talk through maybe some of the things you can do, but this is a huge challenge without a lot of easy answers. So I'm curious as to where this conversation goes tonight, Andy, because I know I am hearing a lot about it. It's certainly top of mind for a lot of folks.
So let's talk about attribution. How do we really know that it's North Korea? Well, CrowdStrike calls this group famous Cholma, which is like a mythical winged horse from Korean folklore, a symbol of speed. And that's the name that CrowdStrike gave this cluster of activity that they've linked to insider access at over 100 companies, mostly in the US. It is global, though. Google's threat intelligence team, through their Mandiant division, has also tracked this extensively. One stat that was interesting, let's see, multiple secondary sources cite that Mandiant saying nearly every Fortune 500 CISO they've interviewed on this topic admits their company hired at least one North Korean IT worker at some point. So it's not in the primary Mandiant report that I found, but it is kind of secondhand from secondary sources, which is super interesting. On the money theft side specifically, which is separate from the wages that they're paying to IT workers, CrowdStrike tracks a related but distinct group called Stardust Cholama, which is focused on stealing cryptocurrency rather than collecting paychecks. The operatives mostly live in China and Russia, and they deploy small teams, usually 4 to 5 people, to those locations. Includes China, Russia, Nigeria, Cambodia, UAE. The FBI has publicly said that both the Chinese and Russian governments are aware that operations exist inside their borders and simply aren't enforcing sanctions against them. South Korea's National Intelligence Service estimates that North Korea's overall cyber workforce grew from 6,800 people in 2022 to 8,400 people in 2024. That number covers IT worker infiltrators, cryptocurrency thieves, military hackers all together. So it's not just like the fake IT workers that we're talking about. It's like they're kind of like their whole operation. And the structure behind all of this reportedly sits under something called Department 53, which is tied to North Korea's Reconnaissance General Bureau, which is their main foreign intelligence arm. How they really do this is kind of interesting. So they have two goals that are running in parallel. The first one is actually just straight up revenue generation. The regime needs money, right? They've been sanctioned by the US and a lot of countries in the world, and so they don't have a good way of generating money. And individual workers can earn a lot of money, especially if, like a lot of these IT workers, they don't just apply to one job. They apply to hundreds of jobs, and then they could work, anywhere from 1 to 10, 15 jobs at a time through remote control of these laptops, right? And so you can earn $300,000 a year easily, right? Just in salary. And then that generates hundreds of millions of dollars for the regime annually. And a UN panel found that the workers themselves are only keeping a fraction of what they earn. Like top earners can earn maybe up to 30%. They can keep up to 30%, but the lowest earners keep, maybe 10%, and everything else goes back to the state. The second goal is espionage and data theft. And that has escalated over time, but starting in 2024, the FBI and private firms like SecureWorks started seeing these workers pivot to data extortion. So they get hired, then copy out some proprietary code or sensitive files, and then threaten to leak everything unless the company paid a ransom. In one documented case, a worker exfiltrated technical data covered under U.S. arms export regulations from a defense contractor that builds AI powered military equipment. So, how they really do this is number one, they build fake identities using stolen social security numbers, other personal information is taken from Americans. Then they apply through LinkedIn, freelance platforms like Upwork. They focus heavily on software engineering and full stack development roles, but it has expanded beyond that as well. And the volume is actually staggering. So Okta's threat intelligence team has tracked over 130 distinct North Korean IT workers across more than 6,500 job interviews at 5,000 different companies. So just 130 people have had the same, at least the same identity, maybe not the same person, but over 6,500 job interviews. Amazon has blocked more than 1,800 suspected operative accounts, and DPRK linked applications are growing about 27% quarter over quarter. One profile described in NBC's reporting was applying to as many as 50 jobs in a single day. And then the interviewer themselves, CrowdStrike believes that it's very likely that these operatives use real-time deepfake technology during the video calls to mask their real identity. That's not that the video they recorded ahead of time. It's like live face swapping technology running during the actual interview. That's pretty crazy. And the other scary part is that a single operator can interview for the exact same job multiple times using different fake faces, different fake names, stacking the odds that one of those personas will get hired. They're also using AI to fake English fluency and get help real time answering coding questions during the technical assessments. They also do things like on their resume. They'll reuse the same phone numbers. A lot of them are voice over IP numbers, the same email addresses across resumes that supposedly are from completely different people. So you should definitely watch for that if you're cross checking your applicants in a tracking system. They often claim they attend schools outside the US, and they build out fake LinkedIn histories, fake GitHub project pages, and lined up fake references who will vouch for them. And then once they're hired, AI helps them juggle multiple jobs at once. Some of these people are holding down 4 full-time jobs simultaneously using AI to draft their Slack messages, emails, so nothing looks off. Once they have system access, they install remote tools like Rustdesk, AnyDesk, TinyPilot, Chrome, Remote Desktop, and you'll see logins from a bunch of different IP addresses tied to that one account. And then, interesting enough, they'll have laptop farms. So this is really how a lot of it works in the end. Either they'll rent like some office space or closet and just house the laptops there and control them again from like China or Russia through a VPN, of course, using remote tools. Or to kind of throw stuff off, they will hire people in the US to host a company laptop in their home and hook it up to their network while they are accessing it remotely overseas. So from the company's point of view, the login looks completely normal because it's the same device using the same IP address, what you would expect from a legitimate employee. So a lot of different things here. One of the things I thought was really interesting, I was reading about this, and they said one guy, they started suspecting that he was kind of a North Korean IT worker kind of scam thing, and they asked him straight up in the interview to like say something disparaging about the supreme leader of North Korea, like just say that he's fat or something like that. And then like he like stuttered, didn't say anything, and like ended the call right away.
Mhm.
So yeah, these are all some really interesting tricks that they're using.
I had heard about the deepfake thing just recently. I had someone ask, "Is there a reliable way to detect that?" And it's like, "Dude, we got bigger problems here. I mean, certainly we want to help you, but that is boy, that's a big challenge. Ask Meta about that. Ask anyone.
Yeah.
It's a big problem. I know we're telling the story here, and we're kind of peeling back the layers of the onion here, and this is the part where you go, man, this is tough. They've thought of everything. I mean, even having someone in the United States to receive the laptop, make sure it's showing up on a United States based IP range, and then having someone control it remotely. The one thing I think many people have predicted for years that LLMs would enable are people who are not fluent or really strong English users to pass that off, because LLMs are incredibly good, if nothing else, at writing maybe flowery prose, but prose nonetheless, the stuff that's reasonable, and you can even coach it to sound in whatever format you want. That's probably the most bulletproof way at this point to detect this is like ask them to say something disparaging about the leadership of North Korea, as obviously that is a not a strong move for a North Korean citizen to make. But hopefully, we'll get into, as we continue the conversation, some more ways to work around this. But certainly, we are dealing with a very motivated, very smart, very talented adversary who has thought through how they work around a lot of the controls we put in place. And so, in general, the cat and mouse game of cybersecurity is we got to up our game. We're going to have to change the way we approach some of these things. And it gets to the point, and we see this all the time, in less respect, people using synthetic backgrounds or people using filters for their face or other things. Like, the fact is that the video feed you see on the other end of a Zoom call, Teams call, whatever, is not one-to-one bits that have hit the photons of their webcam, right? It is processed and edited in various ways. It's perspective corrected, it has some smoothing algorithms applied, so on and so forth. And so ultimately saying, like, I want a photon for photon output of what comes in the camera, like, that already doesn't exist. And I mean, you look at smartphone cameras, and there have been a lot of conversations around, remember that Google Pixel feature that shipped a couple of years ago where you could take multiple shots of like a group photo, and it would pull out everyone's smiling face from the 10 shots you took and make a synthetic image of everyone looking at the camera and smiling together? That picture didn't exist in real life. So this whole idea on, I want a video feed to exactly mirror real life, or I want a photo to exactly mirror real life. The fact is, anything in the digital domain today is 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 enhanced in some way. Like, that is the new normal. Uh, And so we have to change our detection methods, where relying on a video feed and being like, well, if they're on video, we can trust it,
Hmm.
is no longer a valid trust. So we have to find other mechanisms, and we will. But props to the folks on the other end of this attack for upping our game and finding the weak spots and the rough edges in our current process.
Yeah, I want to talk about the money specifically because I think that's also really interesting. So, the United Nations Multilateral Sanctions Monitoring Committee estimates that this IT worker scam scheme has generated somewhere between 250 million and 600 million a year going back to 2018. And then there was a separate State Department led assessment that put the 2024 total specifically close to 800 million for that year. The Treasury Department's own sanctions announcement from earlier this year cites that the near same $800 million figure in 2024. So a lot of money. And no one really has a specific clean number, but roughly anywhere between 250 to $800 million a year. And where does that money actually go? Multiple DOJ State Department officials have said directly on the record that this funds North Korea's weapons of mass destruction development and its ballistic missile program. So that's pretty clear that, either if you're an American who's housing a laptop farm, or a company that has hired accidentally one of these workers, that this money is actually going towards North Korea's weapons of mass destruction development. So pretty dire, if you ask me. One important distinction is that this number is a little bit different than North Korea's total cybercrime haul, which is a much bigger and separate number. We're just talking about the IT worker scam, but like if you talk about their total cybercrime, the UN attributes roughly 2.8 billion over the last 2 years to overall North Korea's overall sanctions evasion activity, and most of that came from cryptocurrency theft, not IT worker salaries. CrowdStrike's most recent financial threat report found that North Korea linked crypto theft alone hit 2.02 billion in 2025, which was up 51% from the year before. So we're talking about two different things, but I just wanted to make sure, you might see that number out there, which is kind of just from the cybercrime versus like this particular IT worker scam that is roughly anywhere between 250 to $800 million a year. Now, this part I did find pretty interesting when it comes to Americans helping them. There's actually, if you look this up, there's a story of this lady named Christina Chapman. I mean, she kind of comes as like this a warning flag to any Americans helping, because she was the first one that was actually criminally charged for this. So she was from Arizona for about 3 years, from 2020 to 2023. She ran a laptop farm out of her own house. Investigators found more than 90 laptops when they raided her home, each one labeled with a sticky note showing which company it belonged to, which stolen identity it was tied to. And through her operations, North Korean workers landed jobs at more than 300 US companies. The list includes 5 top television networks, a Silicon Valley tech company, an aerospace manufacturer, a major American car maker, a luxury retailer, and Nike. All in all, the scheme brought in about $17.1 million. Before any of this, Chapman was posting on TikTok describing herself as homeless in Minnesota, living out of a travel trailer with no running water and no heat. Her personal cut of that 17.1 million was only $176,000, which is roughly 1% of the total. The other 99% went overseas, and according to the government's own sentencing memo, it specifically went to North Korea's munition industry department. She was sentenced to 102 months in prison, 8.5 years, and ordered to forfeit over 284,000. On top of that judgment, 68 Americans had their identities stolen to make her operations work. And she's not alone. There are 2 other men in New Jersey, Kenja Wang and Zhen Shi Wang, who were sentenced earlier this year to 108 and 92 months for helping North Korean workers land jobs at more than 100 companies using at least 80 stolen American identities, generating over $5 million. 2 other American men got 18-month sentences for running laptop farms that placed workers at nearly 70 companies that generated about 1.2 million. One ran his farm out of Nashville and actually reported fraudulent income to the IRS and Social Security Administration under a stolen name. So this isn't, and these are just the ones that have attracted media attention. There's much smaller ones, like people who are just like running 1 or 2 laptops, and those those numbers could be even larger than one. These are just the ones that are running like 90, 80 to 90 laptops in their home. But in general, you can kind of get a sense of how big this is. In June of 2025, the FBI searched 21 locations across 14 states in a single coordinated operation and seized 137 laptops. The facilitators were identified in every single US state except for Hawaii. What is interesting as you read through this is what the North Korean operatives look for in one of these facilitators to host their laptops, because they invest like some real time to build trust, sometimes over months before ever asking for anything illegal. In Chapman's case, someone who studied it put it simply that these operations targets vulnerable people, and Chapman was genuinely vulnerable. Like, she said that she was homeless. She was posting publicly about it, desperate for help, and that's what made her a target for these North Koreans. In the podcast I was listening to, they said that oftentimes they'll look at Reddit subthreads. Like, I think there was like a subthread for like get money now or something like that, right? So basically it's like, I need cash, I need it now. And then the North Koreans would like scour the Reddit subthreads, kind of take it offline to like a Discord or WhatsApp, and then kind of groom them essentially to then eventually get them to host a laptop, pay them $100 a month, and $100, $200 a month to a lot of people who are struggling is huge. So get them just to put a laptop in their home, right? And you're getting paid to do that.
Yeah, this is obviously there needs to be some enablers here, and th- this is challenging to read because very strong sentencing here, and obviously people who probably should have asked questions or raised concerns, but ultimately targeting our most vulnerable people is very not unexpected. And Andy, we have done shows about your employees and the insider risk of your organizations as well, where taking good care of your people is good cybersecurity practice. Partnering with HR and making sure that we treat people with dignity and respect and we pay them a fair above or at market value wage at a minimum and in true market value and not just HR Fantasyland market value. Those all contribute to reducing our risk. And I think you were probably going to make the point a little bit later. I saw it in the rundown, but it feels apropos to talk about it now. It's reasonable to question that if the United States had a stronger social net to capture and help people who are falling on hard times, would it create less opportunity for foreign adversaries to come in and give them the promise of getting out of their current situation? Anyone who's been in challenging financial times knows that desperation and that feeling of wanting to get out of it. And if you land upon an opportunity to do that, sometimes it's really hard to say no. It's hard to be patriotic when you can't put food on your table sometimes,
Mhm.
and it's there's a desperation there, and it's challenging to read because I get both sides of the story. But long long story short, we're not going to solve it today or
Mhm.
tomorrow or anytime soon. Unfortunately, these are big systemic problems in our country and many countries around the world, and ultimately, it's going to continue to be a risk factor and a threat moving forward to where these foreign adversaries can take advantage of these people who have fallen on hard times and leverage them for nefarious purposes. I don't see this going away. So we're going to have to find other ways to mitigate it. And certainly, I had never heard of this person, Christina Chapman, and I'm like to think I'm pretty looped into cybersecurity and the news of the world. So I guarantee you, someone who's on really hard times right now, the fact that Christina Chapman was sentenced to 8.5 years in prison for this hasn't caught their radar. And again, there's always the thought of, well, I could get away with this. Long story short, don't expect this to go away. This is not the way we're going to solve this, is through enforcement and scaring people and being a deterrent anytime soon, because people are willing to do quasi or completely illegal things when it's between eating or not. And
Mhm.
so that's part of the challenge of this part of it. We don't really have a good answer for. And as cybersecurity professionals, it's way beyond and above our pay grade to solve. So I think this is the part we have to accept will continue to be a threat, and we have to find other ways to mitigate it.
I liked how you kind of scoped it a little bit more local to each organization. Like we did talk about that insider threat. And if you are taking care of your employees, you will foster that loyalty to that company. And the more loyal they are, the less likely they are to, betray your trust. There's a reason why. Like I recently, this is the second time now I've gone through a national security clearance process. The first time was when I was active duty military. The second time was when I was supporting the federal business at Microsoft. And there's a reason why a lot of the clearance process for secret, top secret, and beyond focus a lot on your monetary financial stability.
Yes, it does.
Like they ask you how much debt you have. Is your income stable? Like if you're divorced and you have child support to pay or spousal support or anything like that, that is a red flag. Anything that can affect your financial stream has to be reported. So like I'm married, now I was married when I went through the process, but if I would have gotten a divorce, that is a reportable life-changing aspect that has to be reported to your security clearance. It doesn't mean that you're going to get your security clearance like taken away because you got a divorce, but it's something that they need to know about.
Mhm.
And so the reason why they focus on that, on your financial stability, is because people who are less financial stable, if you have a gambling problem or you have a drug problem or anything like that that takes away from your money, you are now more susceptible to foreign influence to sell state secrets, right? Like if I'm in financial trouble and then you come and offer me $1 million to betray my government, I'm probably going to be more likely to do that than someone who is doing fine, right? And that's kind of that's a macro level of like what Americans in general, like right now the economy is tough. There are a lot of people who are struggling to put food on their table. And if someone comes along and says, "Hey, put a laptop in your house. You just need to connect it to the internet and download the software for me and just leave it. Just leave it on. And if we pay you $100, $200, you have 5 laptops, we'll pay you 5,000 or $1,000, right? $200 per laptop put in your house. That can be a life-changing amount of money for a lot of people.
Well, and just to understand how small those dollar amounts are. And certainly a lot of these well-funded adversaries, they could offer more. If the market dried up at those rates, it's no skin off their back to offer $500 a month, $1,000 a month. That's no big deal. I mean, to them in a lot of categories. And so the people who might go, oh, well, $100 a month. And again, to someone who's starving, like that can feed you for weeks if you're smart about it, or at least a week. I guess grocery prices have gone up. But it, it's still like even that dollar amount, like don't get fixated on that. That worked. They were able
Mhm.
to find people to do it for that. But if that dries up and they need to offer more, they will. So
Mhm.
yeah, I just want to point out, like, that's no by no means like, oh, we're hitting we're hitting the top end of our budget here. We don't have any more budgeted for this candidate, like HR BS. Like they'll pay what they need to pay to get it done.
Yep. Yep. Okay. So as we typically like to focus on the podcast here, how do we really spot this and then kind of some practical things we can do to try to limit this? So one, a lot of things that we're going to talk about, most of us kind of picture ourselves catching this, but really like reviewing resumes, spotting reused phone numbers, noticing a deep fake glitch on a video. That's not really something that we do inside a real company, at least as security. And then a lot of recruiters are now using AI screening tools, so they don't ever like talk to a human, and none of them are really spot to kind of they're not really trained to spot a lot of these like nation state trade crap. Like think HR, right? Like they're not trained for this sort of stuff. So how does the security team actually get the knowledge into the hands of people who are doing the screening? So first off, try to translate the threat into something that's non-technical, right? So security teams love writing technical indicators. HR doesn't want that, and they generally won't use it. So what works is something closer to like a one-page card, right? Reused phone numbers across 2 resumes, addresses that don't match the area code, video lighting that looks off, mouth not quite matching the audio. Candidates get vague or cagey on a specific location or school questions, keeping it to 5 or 6 items. Anything more than that, nobody can really actually use. Another thing I like to say is get personal. Like one of the things that I've seen people do is like ask a personal question. What do you like to do in your off time? What was the last book that you read? Right. Or what was the last movie that you saw? What shows are you watching right now? Right. Pop culture. So, or like stick to like current events. Like, for example, like if the person has an address listed in Florida, right? Like hurricane season, you could say, oh, it, I saw that there was a hurricane in your area lately or something like that, right? Or maybe pretend like you could like pretend that there was a hurricane and ask them about the hurricane. And this is something that I actually also coach like new people because I do a lot of like veterans mentoring. When like Adam, I know that you're on like the always on hire, you've done like always on hiring at Microsoft, and I've done it as well where I've interviewed candidates. And I will
Mhm.
tell you, it is painfully obvious when you ask a candidate a question and you see them typing, looking down, and reading something off of their screen. To me, that's a red flag right away for any candidate, but this is obviously like you should be able to tell now. I know you've seen like on TikTok or like Instagram or whatever, like people having their screen like right in the middle so that it looks like their eyes are right there. You can ask them to share their screen or something, like there's a lot of ways to like figure it out. But like in general, if you're not like trying to actively avoid that type of detection, it is painfully obvious when someone is typing and using AI or search or whatever nowadays to answer the questions.
I will say, I personally, for all the interviews I've conducted, I'm not sure I've run into a candidate who is using AI yet, who is typing stuff in.
I have.
But I kind of have a little bit of a different attitude towards that. That's going to be part of your work going forward. So I'm not necessarily opposed if you could still answer my questions in a fluent and confident and accurate way, because you can still tell when there's a level of specificity and details to it versus when it's very vague. And in general, in my experience interviewing, like I want someone who is fluent with detail. I want someone, because I'm interviewing for sales roles, right? And so
Yeah.
in sales, you're juggling a lot of different customers and a lot of different opportunities and deals you're working on. And if you can't jump in and be fluent on, here's the state of affairs, here's how the customer's thinking, here's the challenges, here's what we're trying to do, you have to be able to talk about that fluently. And if you can't, I can tell. And so obviously someone using AI, it's going to be vague, it's going to be not detailed, it's going to be high level. And that to me, for what I was hiring for, was a red flag anyways. If you
Hmm.
could use AI and be fluent, by all means, you're going to be using it plenty at Microsoft, so that's fine. But it, we are going to have to train ourselves on what are we looking for. If I'm hiring someone for a finance role, I'm not going to ask them like to do, hey, what's 25 times 27, like mental math. Like I want to see how can you use Excel, because that's going to be your tool of choice in your business.
Yeah.
So kind of that sort of thing. I think we'll need to recalibrate how we approach that in the future. But for the scenarios here, I'm very curious on what are the ways that we found to be successful to detect these types of candidates from North Korea that are doing these things. And I like, really just go off, go away from business, talk more generically, talk current events. AIs generally aren't good at current events. They sometimes can ground in the web, but it is slow. It's not fluent. Someone who lives in Florida should be able to talk about Hurricane XYZ that just came through there, right?
Hmm.
Someone who lives in the South should be know about the tornadoes that just passed through Tennessee last week, so on and so forth. So that's where I think bringing in current events, that's a great strategy. And then asking about pop culture. Hey, were you following the wedding in New York City this weekend at all? What wedding? Like, I mean, okay, that's a pretty dead giveaway. Like, I mean, most people know Travis Kelsey and Taylor Swift got married. Like that's a reasonable kind of thing to ask nowadays. So we're going to have to adjust our hiring practices and the kind of questions we ask. And I know there's a desire to like get down to business, and we need to determine if the candidate's a good fit, but we may need to open and broaden our aperture a bit to just determine, hey, is this person a real person? Do they really live where they say they live? And we need to validate that, and that needs to be just as much as part of our screening process as screening for fit of the role. That
Hmm.
we need to screen for reality. And honestly, I would be of the argument that that helps us hire better people too, because people who are well-rounded are more adaptable in business. So if I hire someone who's like all they do is this one thing, complete tunnel vision, the challenge I have is if I ever need to reskill that person or their role changes over time, they've demonstrated less of an ability to do that than someone who can juggle multiple things, has multiple hobbies, multiple interests. They obviously are a very adaptable person that can pick up different skills with time. So I would argue that's actually great hiring practice to hire great people, but has the added benefit of may weed out some folks who are not who they say they are.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I saw that you could do is actually get security involved in like a specific tier of roles. So not necessarily every hire, but like if you're, like if it's an entry level job, you don't need to like bother security. But if it's something that touches like access, right? Engineering, DevOps, IT admin, things that touch source code, production systems. You can make it a policy that security signs off on it before the offer goes out. Not necessarily having them sit in on interviews, but maybe reviewing the identity verification, reference checks specifically for that tier of role. One of the things that is really interesting, having been in law enforcement, having been in national security, when people do background checks, and this is something that like a company, they're just going to do they look at your references. I put Adam down as my reference. They're going to talk to Adam. Obviously, Adam's going to give me like raving reviews, right? And then I could also pay someone, right? Like in the case of like North Korea, they're going to reach out to this guy named Adam Brewer. They're going to pay him money, and then they're going to say put him on the reference sheet, and he's going to give him rave reviews. Now, what do people do when they do national security checks or when they do background checks for law enforcement? Is they're going to ask Adam. They're going to be like, "Hey, how do you know Andy?" And he'll be like, "Well, I used to work with him," And then they'll say,
They did
"Okay,
ask
well,
me that, by the way.
uh-huh, yep, yep." And then who else did you work with? Like, was there anyone else on the team? Do you know their names? Did Andy work with them? And then if you have phone numbers for them, right? Because like Adam is just, they're talking to an investigator, and talking to an investigator can be sometimes intimidating. And so like if it's harder to lie when you're trying to give someone a good review, right? And so like if for example Adam's like, yeah, we all worked on the same team together, we were pretty close, and like, oh, who else was on the team? Oh, like Shannon Fritz. Oh, do you have Shannon's number? Oh yeah, sure, here's his number. And then they call Shannon. He wasn't listed on my original interview or reference sheet, but they got to him through Adam, and then they'll talk to Shannon, and they'll kind of try to corroborate the information that Shannon gives them. Like same thing, like they ended up talking to my financial advisor, who I gave him the name, but then they asked the financial advisor, how were you introduced to Andy? And he's like, oh, my cousin knew his wife through like med school. And then they ended up talking to my wife's friend, Sarah, who like is 3 steps removed from the whole thing. And they ended up talking to her for like an hour or something like that. So it's like you can get to other people outside of the reference by just kind of eliciting that information. This is just one of the tactics that people use when they do background investigations. And you can do that, as part of like a security review if you want to do that, if it's for a sensitive role. I also think back to like when I was hired by Microsoft initially, the last time I did an in-person interview. Well, actually I did that at Exact Sciences too, because that's like right in town. But Microsoft, when I got hired by them in 2018, they said, can you come down to our Chicago office and do an interview there? And they paid for travel. They would have paid for a hotel. If I had to fly there, they would have paid for a plane ticket. And so again, maybe not for every single role, but if you're going to have access to stuff, maybe you bring back in-person interviews.
Mhm.
How much of it is it an investment to pay for a plane ticket, a hotel night, maybe a little bit of money for food or whatever, bring them in for an in-person interview, right? Just to cross your T's and dot your I's. I think it's like kind of the fallback, the trend that's been happening a lot in society is like bringing back like the old stuff, right? My son is now into vinyls. Physical media is making a comeback. PlayStation just announced that they were getting rid of physical games and digital copies, but then they like got rid of 550 movies on their digital store that people had paid for, and people realized that when you buy a movie digitally, you're just paying for the license. And so like physical stuff is coming back. Maybe we bring back in-person interviews for, specific roles. You can't really fake that. You know what I mean? I guess you could probably hire someone, but then you'd have to continue to pay that person to like be on camera for video calls or whatever. So anyways, I think those are some of the things. You can also build in some checks and balances into like your your like applicant tracking system, cross-referencing the phone numbers, flagging VoIP numbers, any type of reused email address. And yeah. And so there's quite a bit that you could do, but it obviously depends on HR. And realistically, no matter how good HR's process is, some things might get through. And so like beyond that, access controls during like the hiring stage is another defense. So like you could limit permissions during onboarding, obviously monitor the devices, watch for logins from multiple countries on a single account. Security's job here isn't only to help HR screen better. It's also to make sure that like a successful fraudulent hire can't do real damage before someone catches it. So, anyways, I thought that that was, the other thing too. A lot of companies use staffing firms or contractors, so you're gonna want to verify with them as well. Don't just kind of trust their badge that they hand off to you. And then if you do find something, like you do find someone who is a fraudulent hire, a North Korean IT worker or whatever, report it to the FBI Internet Crime Complaint Center, which is at ic3.gov. So make sure that you report it, pull the device logs from the account before you shut anything down. You want all of that evidence preserved. So kind of to close it up, going back to that know before story, in 25 minutes, they were able to shut down access from the full alert to full containment against an adversary that was backed by a nation state that was using real-time AI deepfakes. And so if you have a good process, that can make the difference. The threat isn't going away, but it's also not unstoppable. It's a hiring problem and it's a monitoring problem. And those are both things that we have good ways of fixing. So, some of the things that I've talked about, I'm sure you can brainstorm other ways, but this is something that is not going away. So we just need to be aware and start to make sure that we recognize those things during the process.
Well said. Nothing else to add at this point. I mean, it is broader than just a cyber problem for sure. It's cyber's kind of job to clean up. But as I love to point out on the show, ultimately know before, shut this down in 25 minutes. Like that's the goal is obviously preventative in all areas as much as possible. But we have to recognize there are times we're going to not be able to prevent and we need to respond. And I think their response very quickly is a feather in their cap. I think they can be justifiably proud of that accomplishment. And sure, they'd love to move and prevent it from happening beforehand. And I think we talked through some ways on the show to do that. Ultimately, I do expect applicant tracking systems to get more powerful and stronger at detecting and preventing this. They're smart. They're going to keep trying to find ways through, and we're going to have to keep trying to find ways to knock them down. The game of whack-a-mole continues, as it always will in cyber. And if nothing else, friends, that's job security.
All right. Well, that's our show for this week. Thanks for watching and listening as always. Our contact information, along with the links to the articles that I used to source this podcast episode, will be in the show notes. If you have any questions or topics you want us to talk about in the future, just email us. Thanks. We'll talk to you guys next week.
Thank you for listening to the Blue Security Podcast. Please check out the show notes, catch up on episodes you may have missed, and subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Find Andy on Twitter at AJaw0 and Adam at AJ Brewer. See you at our next episode.